So today I'm talking to Gabe Hollombe from what is your game company, Gabe? Have you got a name for it?
Well, so yeah, my wife and I did incorporate a company. It's called Gablix Unlimited because my name is Gabe and her name is Alex, and it's an LLC. So we thought it was funny to call it Gablix Unlimited, a limited liability company.
That is pretty cool. And yeah, Gabe and his missus, they're making a game called Pollen Nation, which, according to the website, is a fun and addictive bee-themed puzzle game, and it's coming soon for Android and iOS. Can you tell us a bit about the game, what it is, what the objective is, and yeah, how you came up with it?
Sure. I think I might start with how I came up with it. It's heavily inspired by a game called Triple Town. And for listeners who don't know what Triple Town is, I'll give a brief description. It's a really great turn-based puzzle game where you put pieces on a board, and when you get enough of the same piece next to each other, they combine and become the next piece up in a progression. And then those, if you get enough of the next piece up together in a row or in a line or in, like, they're connecting in some way, they level up, they combine and level up. And so there's a fixed amount of space on the board. And as you put these random pieces that the game gives you on the board, you're trying not to run out of space on the board, because when you can't put another piece down, it's game over. So that's an interesting mechanic in and of itself, but it's complicated in Triple Town by the fact that they give you these bears, and when you put the bears on the board, they move around and they get in your way. And so you want to trap the bears to kill them, and then they turn into tombstones, and then there's a little progression with the tombstones that turn into churches, which turn into cathedrals, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So the the strategy there is, both like trying to make sure that you've got your pieces where you want them to be, so that hopefully when the next, you think of it like Tetris, where you're like, oh, I really wish I had like a four piece, like a line right now, because if I put it there, then I'm going to be able to get four lines. The same thing is, you'll set up your board a certain way and wait for the game to give you that one piece you need, but
Mm-hmm.
then you're trying to manage to make sure that the bears don't walk over into the spot on the board where you're trying to keep safe for that one piece you're waiting to come up.
Yeah.
So
I
that's Triple Town.
yeah. I had a play of your game earlier,
Oh
and
yeah.
it is pretty much exactly what you've described, except the difference, as you know, obviously because you made it, is it's bees and flowers and such, and instead of bears, you have these slugs that get in your way.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about differences between it and Triple Town, because on the surface it does seem really similar, and I'm sensitive to this because there was a bit of a fiasco with Triple Town's creators. So I want to go on the record and say that, this game is heavily inspired by Triple Town, because I think Triple Town is one of the best games ever, and my wife played it addicted for like 2 years
Mm.
straight. It was the only game she played on her iPad, and uh, what happened with Spryfox, the team who makes Triple Town, is this game came out, and they basically made an exact clone. They called it like Yeti Town, and it was basically Triple Town in the snow. Um, and unusually, because most of the time, there's all this legal stuff around how you can't copyright games
Mm.
because, or like the mechanics of games, right? Or you can only like copyright a title. Um, a judge actually ruled in Spryfox's favor, and so Spryfox, if I'm not mistaken, actually they got a cease and desist on Yeti Town, so they had to take that
Wow.
off the market. And I think Spryfox even inherited their IP. So
Wow.
I knew all of this going into making Pollen Nation, and I wanted to make sure that we made it our own, and wasn't just a clone; it was just inspired by. And so some of the differences for Triple Ten players who might be interested in a similar game with some exciting differences are, in Triple Town, it's a square grid, and
Mm-hmm.
on Pollen Nation, it's a hex grid. And so the if you're familiar with the mechanics, it's a lot easier for pieces on a hex grid to touch, because you've got six boundaries around each piece instead of four, right?
Yeah.
Each piece
Exactly.
can touch six others. So there's more interesting opportunities for the board to expand and contract, where you'll think, oh no, I'm about to die. It's going to be game over. I can't put this piece anywhere. And you'll find a
Mm-hmm.
spot on the board, and suddenly, like, almost half of the board will combine in a nice chain reaction. So you get bigger chain
Bigger chains.
reactions
Yeah. Yeah.
in Pollen Nation. Some other differences are, in Triple Town, they have this little holding spot where you can put a piece aside on like a little stump, so that you can save it for later, for when you really need it. So it's kind of like a sideboard. And we decided that, well, that mechanic is really cool. We were trying to explore other mechanics in this game. So there is no sideboard in Pollen Nation. Um, where the slimes are the antagonists instead of bears, and
Mm-hmm.
when the slimes die, instead of becoming this other progression, they basically they just block a square that they die on, or the hex that they die on, for 5 turns, and then they become free again. So there's a different mechanic there where you don't need to manage so much, thinking about where do I want to trap the slimes, because they're, I'm going to need to manage their progression too. And the other difference is, instead of one progression really with the pieces in Tripletown, in Pollen Nation, there's two. There's a flower progression and a bee progression. And then they both meet up at a certain level. Both flowers and bees become hives, and there's a hive progression. So it kind of has a forking structure that they both end in the hive series.
That's exactly what I found when playing it, because you sent me a link just to have a look
Mm-hmm.
at it, and I clicked, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I got it straight away. And
Right on.
yeah, so I realized early on that, okay, you've got two separate kinds of things here. You've got these plants and you've got the bees, and the plants start as like little saplings, and then they turn into a flower, and then that turns into a group of flowers, and then that gets bigger and bigger, a bush. And then with the bees, you start with a baby bee, and then that turns into a bigger bee, and then that turns into a super bee, and then a queen bee, and then I thought that was really cool, like that there were two separate things. And I sort of then started strategizing. Like I'd put down the bees on one side, like to the left, and I'd put down the plants on the right. And then when the slugs came into play, I was like, these guys, because they were kept blocking where I wanted to put down, to connect 4, and I couldn't do it. And then I developed a strategy of, well, what I'll build a little pen, like a little circle, just so there's only one square or even 2 squares. So every time I get a slug, I just chuck them in that hole, and then they die instantly, and then I'm not. Yeah, and that thing you were saying before about the chain reactions being bigger, there was one stage where I thought, oh, it's game over. I've got like 2 or 3 squares left. Oh, there's a slug. Oh, this is terrible. And then I managed to get exactly, can't remember if it was a bee or a plant, but I got exactly the right symbol that I needed, and it matched. And like you say, half the board just went. I'm like, oh, wow, I can keep going for another 5 or 10 minutes here. It was actually, I don't usually play mobile games. Like, I'm more into first person shooters. And I thought, okay, let's have a go at this. And I sat there for literally half an hour or more just playing this thing, and then wanting to say, I know I could do better than this. And I kept replaying it. So, I mean, for someone, I hadn't even played Tripletown before. So I went and looked at the video of that, and I saw, I actually looked at Tripletown and thought, that's too much for me. That's like Age of Empires mixed with this Connect 4 thing. I thought, I don't want to manage buildings and stuff like that. But your game had the right level of simplicity, but at the same time, enough complexity to make me try and think that I can make better strategies to beat it and do better next time. So yeah, I think you've really done well with this one.
Thank you. I wish you can't hear the smile on my face as you're talking. So thank you. I've got a big grin on my face. That's the best feedback I could possibly hear, because I guess your listeners don't know, I'm just a hobbyist game dev. This isn't my day job or anything. And my goal, the reason why we made Pollen Nation, is I had this goal. So I'm going to be 35 in February, and I had this goal back when I was 30. 30 is like one of those life milestone birthdays where you sit down and you look at your life and you think like, okay, what have I done so far?
Tell
what
me
have
about
I not
it. I turned 37 the other day, so I know exactly what you're feeling.
Yeah, and so at 30, right, I made this list of like other things I wanted to get done by the next milestone, which I just randomly picked, is 35. And one of the things on that list was I said I want to make a game that I'm proud of, because I never made a game before, and as I'm a web dev by trade. I build web applications for people. I've always been into computers, and of course I love playing games, and so I thought, I've got the skills. I should just do this because it would feel nice. And that was at 30, so nothing really happened for a while, and then I did a lot one of the Ludum Dares, those 48-hour game competitions. I did one of those back when I was living in Sydney, and it was actually perfect timing because my wife was away for the weekend, and that's great. Not because she's like, oh, I want to hang out all the time, but you feel less guilty if you can capture a weekend alone, and
you're preaching
you're
to the
only
choir.
Responsible to yourself. Exactly. So there was just the planets aligned, or our schedules aligned, and I managed to do one of the Ludum Dares, and I made a very simple game because I thought, well, I don't really know, I don't know a lot about game frameworks or this or that, so I made a very simple game called, let's see, it was for Ludum Dare 26, and I think my submission was called Boogie Woogie. It was called Boogie Woogie because the theme for that competition was minimalism. And so, of course, there were a lot of entries that were inspired by Mondrian, the artist.
Hmm.
And of course, he has a painting called Broadway Boogie Woogie.
Hmm.
And so my game is that game is a bunch of different sized rectangles spawn on a 2D surface, and they move around, and you're a little square, and you're trying to avoid all the rectangles that are different colors than you while you try to make your little square hit all of the rectangles that are the same color as you. And
Mm.
then if you can capture all of the ones on the board that are your color, then your square will change to be the color of the number of rectangles with the most color. So if
Hmm.
there's like, you're blue and you get the last blue and there's 3 red and 2 yellow on the board, it'll switch to red. So you have the best chance of catching more. And it's just one of those, avoid the ones that you don't want and hit the ones that you do for as long as you can. So sort of like a very minimalist shoot 'em up without bullets. And that was fun. And so there are times when you're playing that game and it looks like a Mondrian painting. And so that's why I
Hmm.
call it Boogie Woogie. So anyway,
Nice.
that was like my entry into experience with game dev. But then I said, well, this is fun, but I can't say I'm really proud of this.
Yeah.
And I knew I had to do it right. I had to take probably, there's this advice that I've read in about game dev where they say, if you want to get better at making games, start with games that you love because you understand the mechanics, and then figure out a way to make it your own a little bit. And so
Yeah,
I, s-
exactly. Yeah.
and so I did just that, right? I'm familiar with Triple Town. I love it. It's one of my favorite games. And my wife was getting to the point with it where she was so good at it, and she started saying to me, so Gabe, what if there was this kind of piece in the game, or what if it was on a hex grid? And that's when I said, well, I could just make that. We can find out. We can answer these
Yeah,
questions.
exactly.
I
Yeah.
We can make the changes that you want,
It's
and
like, hang on,
inspire.
I'm a
And you
programmer.
can.
I can do this.
Exactly. And so that's funny, right? Because that was like over a year ago. So Pollen Nation has been over a year in the making,
Hmm.
because it's been all, 3 hours here one night after work,
Yeah.
2 hours there, and then, don't touch it for 3 weeks because life happens and
Yep.
things get
Yep.
in the way. And so, yeah, I think that if you look in my Git repository, my first commit is probably about 15 months ago. So
Yeah.
it's been a long time in the making, but it's the good news is I submitted it to the Apple App Store, and it's approved, and it's
Nice.
just waiting for me to click that release button now. So
That's
uh,
awesome.
we're just gonna submit it out for a few of the game review sites to give them a chance to play it first and maybe form an opinion about it, and then we'll release it.
Oh, that's
My
awesome.
goal is not to make money from this. It's a piece of art. It's creative expression. I'm proud of it, but I'm still going to try and put it out there because I want people to play it, and it'll be free. So
I think yeah, it is one of those things. It's like one of those life goals. It's like in Fight Club where they're in the car and he's asking them what do you want to do before you die, and he's like paint a portrait or build this or do that, and it's like one of those things that,
it
especially
is.
coming from like I'm also a web developer, so coming from that background, you see all of these people in game dev and you're like, I could do that, but I'm just so busy with work. I could do that. And so like hearing your story, like where you say life
Mm,
gets in the way and you don't touch it
yeah.
for through it's like that's this is reality I think for a lot of game developers who get dismayed, and they shouldn't, because like you've given inspiration to me at least. I mean, and other people listening, they can see what you've done and they can see, well, look, this guy, he has a day job, he works on web apps. This is the same thing as I do or whatever. And hey, look, he did it. It took him a bit longer because he was doing other stuff, but he just ran with an idea, took something simple, but it's come out and he's made something that's his. It's his own thing, and it's really cool. And I mean, yeah, I mean, looking at it, I mean, I can't tell the difference between it and one of the big professional games, if you know what I'm saying. Like, it looks quite polished.
Oh, that's
Did you
that's
do?
very nice to hear.
How do you like? You're obviously coming from the programming side. Did you hire an artist, or how did the
Yeah,
look come about?
I want to give a shout out to him because yes, I hired an artist. So I I suppose I could take the time and go through the tutorials, learn how to make art for programmers, but that's not my bag. That's not what I'm great at.
Mm,
And so I felt like I need to have good art for this game because that's how people connect to
mm,
games, right? It has to look good. It has to speak to you emotionally. And I had an idea for the feel, the look and feel I wanted, and so I just kind of put my feelers out. Oh, I did two things. I put a post on Facebook, and I think I said like, "Hey, friends of friends, if anyone knows anyone, I'm looking to hire an artist." And I also went on to, I think there's a subreddit called, maybe it's like game dev jobs or game artists looking for
yeah, I
work.
vaguely sounds familiar. Yeah.
There's one of them like that. Maybe we can put a note to it in the show notes what the actual link is. Whatever that is, I posted there too. And so I got quite a few leads from that. I would say there were probably three strong contenders from that post.
Mm-hmm.
And out of them, it came down to I found one of the three I really liked, but then right before I was going to just make the call and go with him, somebody introduced me to someone here in Singapore, coincidentally.
Oh, nice.
So it was a friend of a friend. So the Facebook thing ended up with one lead, and I was like, if it's the same price, I would rather work with the person who's next
Local.
to me, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Just because it's so much easier to communicate face to face. And also, this guy was a student. He just graduated, and he was looking for work, and
Mm-hmm.
that was that's good for me, right? Because
Yeah.
he's building it's a portfolio piece for him, this game.
Well, this is
And
right. Yeah.
so I got a great deal on it, and we managed to come to an agreement where I said, listen, this is all I can afford to pay you right now, and I hope that you'll trust me, and I promise you, if this game makes me some real money, I promise I will pay you more. And
Yeah.
he was cool with that. Like, that's it's the kind of thing where neither one of us expects this game to make money, but he put his heart and soul into it and made it beautiful. We agreed on something that I was happy to pay him for, because I thought it was really important. You want to pay artists for their work, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You never want to do something where you say like, oh, we'll just do it on spec and we'll do a revenue share, because again, I said like,
That
let's
never
set the
works.
expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I felt really strongly about that I wanted to pay him upfront for the work he was doing. And,
Yeah.
and
Well,
so,
I shouldn't say that spec work doesn't work, but just in my experience and like I freelance a lot, and so it's that kind of thing. Like working for free, your heart's not in it. You've either got to be really invested in the idea, or it's got to be your own project for you to sort of work on something for free. And so it's that kind of thing. If you're paying someone as well, it's that the other dynamic there is if you're paying someone to do something for you, you still have direction as well. Like there's a bit of control, and you can say, well, look, can we do this? Can we do that? Because you're paying them. Whereas
yeah,
when it's a free thing, because I've gone into like a couple of projects that sort of failed because everyone's just like, loves each other and we're going to do it for free and we're going to make lots of money. Where it sort of starts to fall apart is if one person has a difference of ideas, because when there's money involved, there's a boss. Someone actually gets to make the call, and someone gets to be the creative director. Whereas when there's no money involved, it's more sort of when a creative difference comes up, that can be the end of it, because it can sort of just
that's right.
split.
And
So
that
yeah,
happened in our working relationship too. I mean, so there were cases where I gave him a brief about a character design, right? Where I told him what I wanted for the bees, for example, and then he went away and he did some sketches of like 5 different versions of each bee, like the baby bee, the teen bee, the adult bee, the queen bee, and then I would say, well, here, I like this one, I like that one, do and that was nice because he had his opinions too, and I said to him, I want you to feel like you have creative input into this too, because I don't want it to just be, I want it to be exactly this. I'm paying you. I'm the boss.
yeah, no,
But
yeah,
there were definitely cases where there were some designs that he was really more fond of, and I wasn't. And luckily, we managed to work it out where I said, I just this piece isn't working for me, and he was okay with that. So
yeah. I think with artists as well, you don't want to use them like there's this famous, I think, oatmeal cartoon where it's like the guy ends up using, because I think he's a web designer as well. It's like the final frame is like the client using the artist almost as a pen or a crayon, like the actual artist
yeah,
is the pen.
yes,
It's like when the client gets that sort of micromanaging, then it's no longer art. It's just you're being used as an instrument. And I truly believe what you're saying there. You let the artist do what they like. You say you've got here's the parameters, here's the sort of
mm,
idea or the theme that I'm in, and here are some key points that I want to see. Like here's a mood board, or here's some sketches, or here's whatever.
yeah.
But
So I did that. I
use your
put
own
together a Pinterest
creativity.
board. Mm.
Yeah, because
And
then you
he
come up
did
with the
good.
best thing.
So I'll give a shout out to him by name, if you don't mind. His name
Go ahead.
is Nicky Wibisono. His website is Nicky in Progress. That's NICKY in
Yeah,
progress.com.
we can link to it I'll put it in the under the
Cool.
video when I put it up.
Yeah. So I mean, I
That's
think
awesome.
he's probably looking for more work, and he was just an absolute pleasure to work with. Very professional, and did great work that I think we're both really proud of. And everybody gives me the same feedback about the art in the game. They all say, "Gabe, this looks great." And I said, "I know. I had a great artist. I got really lucky."
This is that thing. Like when you look at, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I look at game mechanics of games, I try and imagine a game without the graphics and just get down to the brass tacks. So when I looked at your one, I went, okay, let's just pretend this wasn't bees and plants. I'll just think of it as red and blue hexagons. Okay, so it's basically Connect 4, and then
Yeah.
they combine into green hexagons, which then, and I thought, okay, that's a cool mechanic. And I think that's a trick that a lot of game developers, or at least starting out, they need to get that trick. They need to look at something. They need to look past the flashy graphics and
Hmm.
actually just get the core mechanics. Because I think quite often, I mean, game players, gamers, they'll play a game and they'll love it. But when you ask them why they love it, oh, the graphics are cool. You know, I like the way
Hmm.
that the bee looked, or I like the way that the bear looked, or whatever they're talking about. But then when you actually ask them about the mechanics of the game, they get a bit hazy. But you know, from your angle, it's actually the mechanics they're falling in love with,
That's right.
but it's just the graphics that give it that initial, like you say, it's that thing that gets people emotionally invested. They see the graphics and they go, oh, that looks interesting. I'll click on that.
Yep. So I talk about that. I've given a couple talks about game dev, just my own experiences, right? I'm no expert at all. This is my first, like what I would call my first real game. But
Mm.
I've given a few talks about making games with JavaScript, just sharing what I've learned along the way. Because I should say this game is all built in JavaScript, and it uses the Phaser game engine. Um, I like to say Plants vs Zombies is a lot more interesting than squares versus triangles.
Exactly. Yeah, that nails it right there. Because yeah, people they fall in love with the plants and the zombies.
You
Just
Yeah,
it's
well,
the idea of it.
you connect to the art, you engage with the mechanic, and you need both.
Mm.
I mean, even so, a game that I think is, you could argue is the opposite of that, where there's only the mechanic and it's all programmer art. One of my favorites is like Super Hexagon, right?
Hmm.
But even that, a game where it's literally just different shapes and you're trying to move your little pip around so it doesn't hit the walls. Even that, the execution of the polygon art in that game is spot on.
Yeah.
So I think you could make a pretty bad version of Super Hexagon with the same kind of line, simple graphics art, and you wouldn't connect to it. So
Well, this is it. Like you can make a duplicate of any game, and like you were saying before, the best way I think for anyone starting out is to look at a game you like, try to emulate it, like do an exact replica if you need to for your first one, but then tweak, change bits, add your own
and make it your
rules.
own.
Exactly, but like don't get disheartened when you look at it and it looks like a pile of crap if you're not an artist, because it's going to look like a pile of crap, and all that it needs is, I mean, it's the same, it's probably
Yeah,
exactly the same mindset we have in web development. Like functionally, a website, it's just pulling data from a database and spitting it out to the screen. But what really makes a website cool is the design. Like you can have the same
you got
back
it.
end,
Same layout.
and this is like when
But
you see people say, "Oh, I love this site; it really pops," or "I love that site." It's like I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it functionally. I'm going, that site's actually worse because it's harder to get to the information. I've got to do 3 clicks instead of two, and to
yeah,
navigate. But it's so there is. It's that fine balance between making something that has a really good mechanic and then making it sexy with the graphics. So I think yeah, you've nailed that pretty well. So I just wanted to touch on. You mentioned that you've built it using a JavaScript library called Phaser.
phaser. Yeah,
So why Phaser? And I mean, have you used other ones you can compare it to?
sure.
Or yeah, what's the story there?
Um, I was following Phaser's development for a long time on Twitter before it was ever released, and I got so excited because the guy who was making it had started talking about it for maybe a year before the first version came out. Um, so a little bit about Phaser. The lead developer, he goes by Photon Storm on
Mm-hmm.
Twitter. His name is Rich Davey, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, it is.
And Rich used to be the technical director for Aardman Digital. So, think Wallace and Gromit. That's the Aardman Studios. And they have a digital arm. And so Rich was the TD there for many years. And I think, they built a lot of games and things like that. And Phaser, uh, if I remember right, his inspiration for Phaser was he started his work in Flash
Mm-hmm.
and was using a library called Flixel, and Flixel is a very popular. I think it's still a very popular free Flash, game framework. And uh, Phaser started out as a heavily inspired by Flixel, but for JavaScript for the web.
Mm-hmm.
So not requiring Flash, with a canvas and a WebGL renderer. And I just liked I never used Flixel, but I thought the API made sense, and so I was excited by Phaser and what he was doing, and I also liked the decision he made where early on he said, "Right, I'm not going to worry about rendering. There's already other libraries out there that do a good job of rendering. So he picked one called Pixie,
Mm-hmm.
PJS,
Mm-hmm.
PIXI. And he said, I'm just going to worry about making the framework, everything around that you need for games, and we'll let Pixie take care of the rendering. And I think that carried them for a long ways. I think they are working on their own renderer now, but that'll be for Phaser 3, and it's currently, I think, at Phaser 2 point something. So the next version may have its own renderer, but anyway, that's Phaser. It's awesome. I love
Mm-hmm.
it. My favorite thing about it, when I tell people about Phaser and why I think anyone who uses JavaScript, if you know JavaScript and you want to make a game, this is why I think you should use Phaser.
Mm-hmm.
It's free. It's really well designed, but even that's not really enough. The thing that puts it over the top as the best choice is the insane amount of examples online on its website. So I don't know what the count is right now, but the last time I gave a talk about Phaser, I think there were over 300 examples online of different features of the framework. And uh, so for example here, I'm looking at the website now. Okay, look, they're up to 636.
Yeah.
So in the last year, they've doubled the number of examples. So they have them by category, right? So you think, okay, I want to move the camera around in the world. Well, you can look in the camera section of the examples and see, okay, here's how I make the camera follow a fixed sprite around the screen. Here's how I make a camera, or like a mini camera, like a mini map. Every simple feature in the game has its own basic example, or sorry, every simple feature in the framework has its own example that demos all the code you need to know to make that happen and nothing else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like, I think that's the best. That's the best kind of documentation. And then of course they also have several complete games of different styles as, as demo games. So you can see how each of these features combines, and how they recommend that you structure your code so that you can take advantage of everything in Phaser. So it's just an amazing resource for people who want to make games if you know JavaScript.
Yeah, no, I started like when I was looking at doing game dev with JavaScript, and like this was a few years back now, and I don't think Phaser was as good as it is now, because I'm just looking at their site as well, and I'm blown away by the examples page, because like if I'd seen that back when I was looking, I'd probably I chose another one when I was just playing with things. I looked at Impact.js.
Yep. So I own an Impact license as
Same,
well,
yeah.
and
And
that's what I used for my Ludum Dare game.
okay, cool. I really liked it, but like and because the guy who
Dominic,
develops,
right?
yeah, he's an absolute genius. That guy.
He
Like
is. He
I
really
read
is.
his blog and the stuff that he does. Like he's just a crazy mad scientist programmer. He's like John Carmack, but for web and JS.
Amen. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, and like so when I was first looking and comparing, I think at that stage Impact was probably out in front, but like yeah, I mean it's still great, but I'm just now looking at this Phaser site going, holy shit, look at all these examples and it's free. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's got a great community. So I didn't mention that, but there's the HTML5gamedevs.com forum site, and there's a ton of different, sub forums targeting different things, and very active community, supportive. If you have a question about Phaser, you can file an issue on GitHub. You can make a post on HTML5 game devs, and you'll definitely get an answer.
Yeah, I think
Probably not from the core maintainers. Like the community is really supportive.
well, this is it. And like, but yeah, whether people pick Phase or they pick Impact or they pick another one, I think a lot of these new JavaScript game libraries that are coming out have that kind of community vibe to them. There's a lot of, I think because it's web technology, I mean, I know a lot of people come into it and they've not done web at all. And so that for them is a bit of a learning curve. But
Yep.
for people like you and I who are web developers and we see these things, it's such a very attractive on-ramp into game dev, because it's all the stuff you already know how to do. And all you're doing now is looking at examples and going, okay, how do they do that? And all the technology there, like you know about Canvas, you know about HTML, you know about CSS, you know about JavaScript.
Yep.
And it's just like, wow, I didn't know I could actually make something that looked that good with these technologies. So it's, looking at examples is really, I think that's the way forward. So yeah, you could have. I mean, the other way game developers go now is they look at these bigger libraries like your Unreal Engines and your Unities. I mean, I'm working similar to what you're saying. Like I'm working in my spare time, i.e., once every few weeks on this game in Unreal Engine.
Yeah. Is this recovery?
Yeah, Rico, and I see all these examples that people are putting out. So it's that same thing. Unreal Engine have this kind of deal where it's now free and there's all these examples and it's a big community. And I think if anyone's sort of starting out in game dev, that's what you look for. Regardless of what you actually
Great.
settle on, it's the community that and the documentation that sort of makes it
Yep.
worthwhile. That's how you should
100%.
decide. Um, but yeah, I mean, the other thing is as well, I think there's been this perfect storm lately, or at least in the last I don't know, I don't want to say 10 years, but 5 years at least, where it used to be that mobile games, if you wanted to make a mobile game, you had to learn like C sharp, or sorry, not C
Yes.
sharp, but whatever it is, Objective C.
Objective C, if you wanted to make an iPhone game, that was your pretty much your only option for
Yeah,
learning.
and you had to develop on a Mac because you needed
Yep.
Xcode, and if you wanted to make a Android game, then you had to use Java and all the rest of it. But now we seem to have this perfect storm. I'm not sure that everyone's aware of this, but a lot of the mobile apps that you're seeing on your mobile phones now are just web pages. They're just web apps. So
Mm.
it's this same technology. So, I mean, I highly encourage anyone out there who's even thinking of getting into programming, like not even people that are sort of already programmers, but if anyone's getting into programming, I would say pick JavaScript, because what you'll end up with is the ability to either go into app development or web development, which, that can pay the bills. But then, like you've done, you can then branch off, use those skills in game dev and actually make something that's, you could make the next Angry Birds. You could make the next Pollen Nation.
You could.
So yeah, what inspired? Like you were saying before, you were inspired. You were always into computers, and you sort of got into the web stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
from my angle, I think when I was younger, I was mostly inspired by games, and
Yeah,
then
me too.
it just happened that I learnt web because web was sort of happening in the late '90s or mid '90s, and then that ended up being my career. And it's sort of like it's that fork in the road where it sort of diverges one way, and every now and then I glance over and I see game dev, and I'm like, wow. But what's happening is I think the fork in the road is actually now converging back again with this thing that I'm saying about the JavaScript being able to be used for that.
Yeah, at
So
least from a common skill set perspective, I agree with you. Yeah.
yeah,
So, I mean, yeah, you have a similar inspiration story to how I think you came to computers as I did. I mean, yeah, I grew up playing a lot of games and loving computer games and just being so captivated by them. Of course, I think shout out to my mom. Thanks, Mom. Whenever a new console came out, I really wanted that, and she we didn't have a lot of money growing up at all,
hmm
but she made sure, because she knew how much I loved games, that whenever a new console came out, that next Christmas, if that was really what I wanted for Christmas, I could have that. And that
yeah,
was I mean, I think a lot of parents are like, wow, I really don't want my kids playing so many games. And I didn't only play games. I think that we need to paint a more accurate picture here.
yeah,
I was a very active kid. I did sports. I was really engaged with school. I got great grades, but I also love playing games. And so, I had a Nintendo. I had a Super Nintendo. I played
hmm
Genesis. I mean, maybe we're dating ourselves here, but I had an Atari. My first
I
console was an
my
Atari.
mine too. I had an Atari
Yeah,
2600, and I can
yeah.
remember. And
Jungle Hunt is like the best game ever.
yeah, and like, that was the thing I was thinking about before. Like back then, it almost was red square versus blue triangle, because the graphics you had to imagine. I mean, the cover on the box showed all this really good art, but in the actual game, it was squares and stuff. But at the same time, back then, the mechanic was everything. If the mechanic was there, and they told you that you were a wizard, or they told you that you were a
Mm.
spaceship, you believed it.
Yeah,
And
sure.
and as games have sort of progressed, it's sort of, yeah, I think people are losing the art of mechanics. So I mean, if anyone's sort of getting into game dev, they need to go retro. They need to look back at these old consoles, and yeah. And the similar story to yours with the console, like your mum buying one when they came out. I had a similar story. I had a Commodore 64 at one stage, and I didn't have the disk drive. I had the tape deck. So
Yep.
basically, to load a game could take anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour. And then, like, kids nowadays would be like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, yeah, you had to put a cassette tape in this thing, press play, and type a command in on the computer, and then go away, and then come back, and then you could play the game. So you really wanted to have to play that game
Yeah.
if you wanted to play it. But we didn't. We were also not too well off, and I remember um, either I had saved up enough money or my mum had put aside enough money. We went to Kmart, and they didn't have any. Like, I'd been looking at it, and it was
Uh,
on my wish list for so long, and we finally had enough money, and we went there. It wasn't there, and I was heartbroken. So she ended up writing a letter. It was either, I think it was to Kmart or to Commodore. I can't remember who, But then several weeks later, there was a knock at the door. A delivery man delivered a tape deck. We didn't have to pay for it or anything. Like
Nice.
it was from either Kmart or Commodore. I can't remember which. And it's like, there's a tape deck, and I was like, wow. And so yeah,
Wow.
it's that same feel good story about back
Yeah.
then. Yeah, we used to be like you'd ride bikes everywhere and you go and play and stuff. But and computer games weren't. I don't know. Maybe that's the other thing as well. I wanted to just ask you. Back then, do you think computer games were addictive as they are now? Like I
Oh
don't.
God, no. Yeah, so this is and I can speak to how I've incorporated that into Pollen Nation too, right? So I agree. I think that games these days are a lot of them anyway are they're made to extract money from people who play them.
Mm,
And I have such an ideological opposition to this. I mean, it really grinds my gears because right, the games that we grew up playing, you bought the game, you played the shit out of it, and
mm-hmm,
that was it. It didn't cost you any more money, right?
mm-hmm.
At all. And that's what a game should be. You shouldn't have to buy a game or you shouldn't get a game for free, start loving it, and then get to a point where basically the boss is too hard and you can't beat him unless you buy that gun upgrade for 99 cents.
Yeah.
That just really cheeses me off. And so I knew that making Pollination, I wanted it to be a free game because I want people to play it. My
Mm,
goal is not to make money.
yeah,
But
that's excellent.
but I also knew there are people out there who are happy to make an in-app purchase to alter their gameplay experience. And so I was very careful to not make anything in Pollination that requires you to pay at all.
Yeah.
So my revenue model in Pollination is as you play the game, you earn coins at certain points milestones, and you can use these coins to buy pieces in the store. So think of it just like the Tetris analogy again. You're like, oh, I really need that L piece right now. That'd be really great. You can just go to the store and spend a few coins, and that will become the next piece that you can put on the board.
Uh huh.
Um, but I'm giving you coins just as you play, and so you never need to give me more money for more coins. But if you want to, you can.
Yeah. So it's not pay to win, but
Not
it's
pay to win.
pay
It's
to if enhance if you want.
Yeah, pay to enhance, pay to change your gameplay experience if you want to. That's your choice.
Yeah.
So that was my compromise that I put in because I wanted something. Oh, and I didn't want ads. Uh,
Yeah.
I didn't want ads because again, growing up, we didn't have ads in our video games, except maybe if you think back and you're really clever, you can spot like billboard ads, in
Yeah.
Outrun or in the racing games. And so there's really interesting articles about product placement in the old school video games. But really, there weren't any ads, the obnoxious banner or interstitial video ads that we get in these games now. And I didn't want that at all. So that was a compromise I made.
No, and that's a good ideological sort of standpoint to have. I'm the same. I mean, I watched a documentary only the other night about slot machines, about poker machines,
Oh, about Pokies, yeah.
here in Australia, man, it's ridiculous. I think over in the US, like the percentage is the machine's supposed to give you back 90 something percent over a course, but obviously you end up putting the money back in, so you eventually go broke. But
Of course.
here in Australia, I think they drill it down even harder. Like they might only give you back 85 to 90%. So it's slightly more, but it's enough. And it's such a thing. And like there was talking about the addiction
Yeah.
with it. Like they were interviewing even the sound designer. So he'd say, look, we only ever play positive sounds, positive music. When you lose, we don't play any sound. It's silent, so there's no negative reinforcement.
Wow. Yeah,
It's
this is all designed
it's all
for a very
design and
specific
psychological,
purpose.
and this is where I think mobile games are sort of heading into this, and we're using these same tricks. So again, it's not, but it's not for nefarious purposes. It's because yeah, we want people to play our game because we want to sell our game and make money off it. But at the same time, there's that fine line. So you've taken a good stance in that you've made yours pretty, but you haven't made it, and people can pay you to customize it, but they don't have to pay you. They can just go old school. They buy it once, they play it, and they can play the shit out of it till
Yeah, they don't
yeah.
even need to buy it because it's free, and you
Oh,
can
there we
you can
go.
you can play Pollination as much as you want for free and never do an in-app purchase, and you'll have a great time playing.
See, that is beautiful. And see, yeah, I think that's probably a thing a lot of game devs should get at. I mean, I know it's not going to make you, well, hey, it still might make you rich, but who knows? But like,
Yeah, but that wasn't the intent, right?
exactly.
So yeah,
That's
I had to be true to my goals, and my goals were to make a game I'm proud of, and I could not make a game that I'm proud of that was pay to win or that had ads and for the purpose of making money because I have a day job, right?
yeah,
That's different. If I decided, right, okay, gonna make my day job now making games. You need to get real. You need to think about how you're gonna get paid to do that.
Hmm.
And sure, pay to win or ads. They can. Those are options that you have available to you. But you can also do things like license your game to these aggregators. Especially if you make it with web tech.
Mm.
There are still plenty of sites out there like Congregate and others where you can say, "Hey, I've built this game. It runs in the browser." There's so many people that will still just like play a game for 20 minutes on their lunch break at their computer somewhere, and you can license your game to an aggregator site like that that'll let people play it, and they'll put an ad on the side. But it's still you could argue that it's not part of your game's creative deliverable.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a way that you can sort of make a passive income without sort of destroying people's
Yeah,
psychology like poker
you
machines.
got it.
No, that's beautiful, Gabe. So yeah, I'll probably wrap it up there. Shit, we've been
Okay.
talking almost 3/4 of an hour, but it's been great. Like it's really good, like I said before, to come across someone who's not only, I think we've got a lot of shared experiences with our game development and web development kind of stuff, but someone who actually they're doing it because it's something they wanted to do, and it's a life sort of goal, and you've achieved that. So it's really inspiring, Gabe.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Yeah. So everyone, go check out Pollen Nation. It's at playpollennation.com. I'll put a link down the bottom along with all the other links that we talked about. And yeah, check it out. When is it going to be? So you've got it currently, it's been approved and you're just waiting to hit the
It's been
button.
approved. I'm just waiting to hit the button. I'm happy to go on record and say it's coming sometime in November.
Cool. And that's for iOS. And how about the Android version?
Right. So quick plug for that. I mean, another great reason to write it in JS is you can release on Android too. You don't have to change your code base. So the Android version is probably, I would say, Q1 next year. All I need to do is integrate with the Google Play Store and the like the high score tracking and things like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
because it's different between Apple and Android's APIs. So that shouldn't be too much work. I'll probably have the Android version out in Q1 next year.
That's excellent. Okay. Thanks very much for your time, Gabe. That was brilliant talking to you, mate. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. It's been a pleasure.